And this
What's he doing?
is to go even further beyond.
What's up, everyone? My name is Josh, and today I'm going to be talking about something I've been very, very passionate about for many, many years. I've been following it for a very long time, ever since the golden era, and that is bodybuilding, and how it's kind of slid down in a bad direction, I feel. At least the Olympia stage, not so much into like the Arnold Classic and stuff, but it's still there. But I feel like Arnold is trying to fix that. So this is going to be a little bit of a long video, but bear with me. I'm going to bring it home and try and get through it as fast as I can, because there's a lot to discuss. So to go back to the start, I'm going to go back to when Arnold was on the scene and he was trying to make headway with bodybuilding and bring it mainstream and get it in front of people's faces. So in 1974, around 1974, when he won his 5th Mr. Olympia title, there was talks of doing a video or documentary for bodybuilders. But in order to do that, they needed to raise the money to be able to shoot the movie, and you know, it was a very low budget, but they needed to find funds. So what they did is that Arnold and some of the other bodybuilders at the time, Lou Ferrigno, Franco Colombo, Serge Nubret, I think was another one, they did like a exhibit type thing where they were in a room and they basically stood there like sculptures, basically. They would just stand there, and they would stand on a rotating platform and would just go around in circles, and then they would change poses to show the different muscle groups. And this got a lot of attention. It was huge. People were out the door. They were selling out tickets. So needless to say, it made the money that they needed to do to make what now is pumping iron. And the big thing for Arnold is that he was always, for him, bodybuilding was an art. You know, it's a big thing. You know, he talks about it in the movie. He says, you know, a painter can just add deltoids, but for a bodybuilder, they have to go through the physical work and add it. So, you know, if something was short or something needed work, then he would work on it and do the physical part of it. But it was always keeping with proportion, always making sure everything looked nice, everything was shaped the way it was supposed to be to make the body look like perfection. So that was always his big thing. So in 1975, when he did what he won, probably his best Mr. Olympia, or his best physique, he won, and the movie was based around that, or the documentary / movie was based around the 1975 Mr. Olympia. And I mean, you can see people back then were all like super, what's the word I'm looking for? Aesthetics. They had aesthetics. They had proportions downright. They, you know, it wasn't freakish or anything. Everyone, all the competitors looked, they looked good. Arnold was obviously ahead of his time by far. I mean, there's one of the many reasons why Arnold was one of probably the best bodybuilder of all time. And I know people are going to argue with that. Well, the fact is that if you go forward in time to like when Lee Haney was winning, he won 8 times, and then Ronnie Coleman, he won 8 times. So you say, well, Arnold only won 7 times, so why is he the best bodybuilder? Well, first off, Arnold stopped bodybuilding. Well, he didn't stop bodybuilding. He stopped competing after the 1975 to pursue movies. because he knew that it would be years and years and years down the road before bodybuilding ever really got big enough where he could make it into, be very rich. And he always wanted to be rich. He saw Hercules with Steve Reeves, and he wanted to be in the movies. Bodybuilding was his first passion, then being in the movies. So he took it to the next level, and it was a slow start. In order for him to get into Stay Hungry, the director told him he needed to be at a certain weight. I think it was either 215 or 225 before he would shoot it. And he was like a bodybuilder in the movie. And I think Sally Fields and Jeff Bridges was in it. But that was kind of his first step. It wasn't like a huge success or anything, but it was still one of his first movies. He did Hercules in New York, or Hercules Goes Bananas, whichever one you want, and they actually used the different name, Arnold Strong, because they didn't think that his name was going to be remembered. They thought people were going to have a hard time spelling it and saying it, and he stuck with it, and he said, no, I'm going to keep my name, and believed in it. So when he retired, bodybuilding obviously was still going on, and they had other people competing. Franco Colombo, Lou Ferrigno, I think, stopped after he lost for a little bit. And then going forward to 1980, which was Arnold's very last Mr. Olympia that he competed in, and he was going up against Tom Platz. And Tom Platz was the first guy to bring out like these. His big thing was his legs. He had these big legs, and bodybuilding back then wasn't really about legs. A big thing that had gone around about Arnold is that he was weak in the legs. He didn't have big legs. Phil Heath made a statement and say, well, let's face it, Arnold was good, but he had no legs. Well, first off, you can't make a statement that he had no legs, because way back in the 70s, even into the beginning of the 80s, they didn't even have poses that involved legs. They didn't have abdominal thigh, or they didn't have, when you did a back double bicep, you didn't like squeeze your glutes and your hamstrings and you had your calf in a certain position to pull out your calf. You didn't do any of that. They stood up straight and they did a back double bicep. It was all about from the back up. So their poses weren't really about their legs. Yes, they had defined legs, but it wasn't like these freakish legs that can't even fit into jeans anymore. So if you go back and say, okay, well, we're going to focus on legs just as much as upper body, Arnold, with his work ethic and his determination to win, would have had legs comparable to what they are today, because that's what he did. He won knowing what he had to do. He would have worked on his legs and done it, or did it, until they were satisfied, or he was satisfied to match with his proportions, and it would have been enough to win. So I don't really agree with that statement. I think at the time it wasn't as popular. The leg portion was not as popular as it is today. So Arnold ended up winning the 1980 Mr. Olympia, his last title, his 7th Mr. Olympia title. It was pretty controversial because people thought, well, there are other competitors that may look a little bit more in shape or feathered, or it was just, people have a hard time believing that Arnold could take 5 years off and come back when he was doing Conan. He did Olympia because he was training to be Conan the Barbarian, which was his big step into the movie business, where, they needed a big guy. They needed a muscle guy to fill this role. So it was kind of worked out for him, where Mr. Olympia was happening at the same time, and he jumped in and said, well, I'm already training, so why don't I compete for the 1980 Mr. Olympia? And people had a hard time because he wasn't in the bodybuilding scene for 5 years. And for him to come back and win, it just angered a lot of people. But he is the best for a reason. He took bodybuilding into a direction that nobody will ever be able to beat. You know, I know there's a lot of very, very famous bodybuilders out there, but unfortunately, and I'm not dissing on any of them, so I don't, you know, I'm not trying to make anybody angry here, but no one will ever have the name that Arnold has because of what he did for the sport. For what he pole vaulted the sport from just being this little thing to this mass, you know, this big thing that everybody draws to. Well, I won't say everybody, but a large number of people draw to each year in Vegas that they compete for. But anyways, getting back to why I think bodybuilding is heading for a very, very bad direction. Mostly, I think Olympia is worse than Arnold Classic right now, but they're still like about the same until Arnold really puts the hammer down and say, look, I don't like the way it's going. So, through the years, Arnold was always in the scene. When they came out with the Arnold Classic, you know, even though he left bodybuilding and he wasn't doing competitions, he still was very, very big part of the bodybuilding community. And he always supported the sport, still loved the sport, you know, still trained, just not to the level that he once did. But still was very passionate about how the bodybuilders looked, how they posed, how they came on out on stage. So as the years started to go by, I think it was like Dorian Yates. When Dorian Yates came onto the scene, and he won Mr. Olympia titles. But when he came out, it was sort of like, started like the slide of where bodybuilding has gone today. And what I mean is that these bodybuilders started to get a lot bigger, a lot more meatier, to freakish proportions. And he was like the first of the wave that hit after that, because Dorian Yates came out, and I think Lee Haney was he was Lee Haney or someone else that was trying to compete with him, and had to basically bulk himself up to match Dorian Yates. And then when Dorian Yates was beat, it was like this new thing where now you had to be this monster. And then Ronnie Coleman came out, and Ronnie Coleman arguably is probably the strongest and biggest bodybuilder, or Mr. Olympia, to date. He was just enormous. And then he was going up against Jay Cutler, and Jay Cutler couldn't beat him. He lost to him 5 times in a row because Ronnie Coleman was just so freakishly big. And unfortunately, I think that started to hurt the sport. And it's because it was no longer about proportion and symmetry and how the body looked. It looked like, you know, this sculpture thing. It was no longer about a sculpture. It was just about being a freak and being the biggest you can be. And then it stayed strong through Jay Cutler, because Jay Cutler was a big guy. And then Phil Heath came around, and Kai Green came around. And the same thing. They followed the same thing. Now, Phil Heath is an amazing bodybuilder, and he has these, you know, what they call 3D muscles, where they just pop out, and they, you know, that's the reason why they call him the Gift, because he's gifted in certain areas of his body. But it's the same thing. These guys have just gotten so ridiculously big that it's not appealing or attractive anymore. It's just not something to look at. Women don't go up to, you know, I won't say all women. I'll say like 98% of women aren't going to go up to this person or these bodybuilders and go, wow, that is incredibly attractive. When they're so incredibly big, they're going to dwarf, you know, there's going to be nothing left to the female. Because they're so big. It's just not, it's just too much. They can't, these bodybuilders aren't even able to wear jeans anymore. You know, because their legs have gotten so big, and their proportions are off. And then you look at Ronnie Winkler, same thing. Ronnie Winkler is just, he's got these gigantic arms and this gigantic upper frame. And again, I'm not trying to get on anybody. I'm just saying this is kind of where it's gone. And the same thing with Big Ramy. Gigantic, Ronnie Coleman size, huge, just gigantic legs, gigantic. His proportions are just way all over the place. All these bodybuilders are in really good shape, but it's just gotten way, way too much. It's too much for people to look at and say, geez, I want to look like that. I want to be like that. I want to have that body. No, it's ridiculous. And that's the reason why these same bodybuilders, year after year, are competing. The same ones over and over again, because people aren't getting that big. It's an unattainable physique without massive amounts of drugs, massive amounts of human growth hormone, creatine, and all that other stuff that they have to take to get that big and to maintain that physique. And Arnold has been very, very vocal about the dislike of these physiques and the guts that these bodybuilders are getting because of all the growth hormones that they're taking and everything else. It's producing these guts. Now, they have abs, but when they're not flexing the abs, they have this big bubble gut. And I know in the last couple of years they've been trying to fix that and make it so it's not as notable or not as bad, but you can still tell that it is nothing, not even close to what it used to be. You look at Frank Zane's vacuum pose, where he was a stick, or even Arnold's back then, his waist size was like 32, but he managed to pull off the same arm size that anybody else has today, and his back would rival anybody today, but his waist was, skinny as can be. So I think it's just become this huge, huge problem that I think, if it keeps going like this, the bodybuilding community is going to start tanking. I know that people are going to argue with me. People are going to say, well, we have tons of people that come to these shows, sold out tickets, sponsors and everything. Yeah, that's fine. But if I go up to anybody, any random person, and I say, do you know who Arnold Schwarzenegger is? Oh, yeah, I know who Arnold Schwarzenegger is. Oh, do you know who Phil Heath is? Or do you know who Kai Green is? Do you know who Big Ramy is? They're going to be like, no, I don't know who that is. Because unless you're very, very much into the bodybuilding scene, you don't know. Even some people that I know go to the gym and work out all the time. I'll say something about the Miss Olympia, last year's Miss Olympia, and they'll be like, oh, I don't know any of those people. You have to be seriously dedicated into the stuff to know any of these people. And I think it's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse. And if they keep going the way it is, Arnold came out on stage during his Arnold Classic in Ohio when Kai Green won, and he said, yeah, your posing was great, which it was incredible, and you're in good shape. But he personally felt that Sean Roden was the better physique, is a physique that he would like to see in bodybuilding because he's more proportionate. His symmetry is better. It just looks more aesthetically pleasing to the eye. It's not a freak show like some of these bodybuilders are, and it's just way, way too much. And if you go on to videos, Lee Priest is another very famous bodybuilder, and he's saying the same thing, and he was in the scene, and they're saying, it's headed for disaster, and it really is. If they don't fix this, and basically what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to say, their judging criteria is going to have to be different. They're going to have to say, look, if it's not going to just be about freak size anymore. It can't be, because people aren't liking it. So you're going to have to rein it back, whether that's lose some muscle or whatever, come in more proportionate, so all your muscles look, nothing's bigger than the other thing, everything's kind of flowing together. I think it could end bodybuilding. Not end it completely, because I know that there's still a lot of people that love the sport, and I mean, I know a lot of people today, everything's about, a lot more things are about fitness, you know, with the fitness shows on TV and everything else. I know it's still out there, but they're not taking it to the level of, you know, the bodybuilding Mr. Olympia and these contests anymore, because it's just not possible. You basically have to, first off, it takes many, many years just to get that big, or to get a big physique anyway. But to be a Mr. Olympia, you're taking massive, massive amounts of steroids at this point to get that size, to be even considered to be standing on that stage. And I know if you go back in the day, well, you could say the same thing, that everybody was taking steroids and to get that big. Well, yeah, these bodybuilders were taking steroids, but if you look at it, it was a much more attainable look back then in the 70s and the 80s, and even somewhat into the 90s, than it is today. It's just no longer attainable for people to get that physique. So I'm hoping that they're going to fix it. I'm hoping Arnold is going to have a bigger voice in being able to, you know, change these judges' minds. Be able to just kind of say, hey, look, I don't see this going in a good direction. If we don't fix this, I don't know what the future of bodybuilding is going to be. So, to me, just I hope it's fixed, because I love the sport, and I do follow it. I do follow, you know, the guys on Facebook and their YouTube channels. So I still look into it. It's just it's not as good as it once was. Definitely, they call it the golden era of bodybuilder when golden era of bodybuilding when Arnold was doing it, for a reason, because it's just a much more pleasing to the eye look than it is today. So I'm gonna do more of these videos. I'm gonna, you know, follow up on the Mr. Olympia that's coming in I think a month. Next month, the Mr. Olympia 2016, and kind of give you guys an idea of what I think. I'm hoping that it's better than last year. I don't see Kai Green competing. If he does compete, I don't see him winning. Nothing against Kai Green. I feel the same way about Big Ramy, and I feel the same way about Ronnie Winkler. Same thing. They're not going to win, not because of their physiques. It has nothing to do with their physiques. Well, maybe a little bit, but mostly it's going to be about politics. And it's going to be about politics because to be Mr. Olympia, you have to help the sport in the right direction. You have to, you know, do interviews and picture shoots and go all over the place, and you have to be an ambassador for the sport. And the reason why I say that Kai Green and Big Ramy and those guys won't end up winning, because first off, Big Ramy is an Egyptian. He has a very hard time speaking the language, and I don't know if he can say much of anything in English. So that's going to hurt him right there. That's going to be an instant no-win, because people can't come up to you and ask you questions and talk to you, and you can't answer them back. You can't talk to them back because you don't know the English language. And the same thing with Ronnie Winkler. He knows a little bit more of the English language, and he can talk, but it's hard to understand him. You know, he can't really, it's not fluent. You know, I know people are going to say, well, Arnold had an accent, and Arnold wasn't American. Well, that's true, but when Arnold was doing Mr. Olympias, he learned how to speak English very fast and became where you could understand what he was trying to say. It was nothing, he wasn't stumbling. You know, when he talked, you knew what he was saying. And as for Kai Green, I just think for him, he doesn't play by the rules. He doesn't, he kind of does things his way when he wants to. I don't think his little, again, nothing against Kai Green, you know, he's a great bodybuilder, but him doing like the street performances in New York where he's wearing a mask and standing there flexing out in the street, or, you know, when he's doing these costume things and he's dressed up with these capes and he's got this big arm things with spikes on it and stuff, I think that that's hurting him. I don't think that that's helping his situation if he ever wants to be Mr. Olympia. I think people look at that and just think it's weird, and I don't think it just... They don't want that when you're trying to promote the sport, because it just comes off as stupid and dumb and arrogant, and it's just not what bodybuilding needs right now. They need somebody that's going to help the sport in the right direction, and just be able to talk to people about where it's headed, and you know, what they can do to help themselves if they want to possibly, you know, maybe not step on the stage, but improve their overall physique. So we'll see what happens. I will continue doing the video, and we'll see what who wins this year. Till next time, guys.